Hey, I'm Brooklyn Howell, and this is my research proposal presentation. My topic is sports specialization and injuries in adolescent female soccer players. I will be given an introduction and an overview of the study, stating the problem and the purpose, followed with a brief literature review and the methods section. To introduce my topic, college and professional sports is the ultimate goal for most adolescent athletes, including female soccer players. This leads them to choose to specialize, meaning that they'll play one sport for more than 8 months out of the year. So pretty much year round they're playing their sport. And that is believed to be leading to an increased injury risk. So that goes into the statement of the problem is according to Post in an article in his article, Association of Competition Volume, Club Sports and Sports Specialization with Sex and Lower Limb Injury History in High School Athletes is that these athletes, they're adolescents, but they're practicing like elite athletes. The intensity and the amount of time that they put into their sport is beyond what most people would even can think of would be required of these athletes. They are putting in the same amount of time as some colleges do. And it's interesting to think about, but it takes its toll on their bodies. And then that goes to the next point. There are several articles that they state that the hours spent practicing and competing is leading to injuries. It's several of these articles I've cited is these athletes are competing in or practicing more hours per week than the athlete's age. And so you have kids who are 16 and they are practicing and competing more than 16 hours a week in their sport. That's the time adds up on their young bodies. And then back to Post and his colleagues with club participation. There are some athletes that are participating in their high school season and their club season at the same time. So, for example, I coach a soccer team, and I have girls who come to my practice, and then after my practice they go to their club practice, or they go from my practice to a club game, and they're doing this so they're getting two practices or two games, some multiple times a week, and then games on the weekend. It adds up competing all that amount of time, and especially when they're doing it year round. And so there leads me to my question. Is there a positive relationship between sports specialization and injuries in adolescent female soccer players? And so the purpose is to determine if there is a positive relationship between sports specialization and injuries in adolescent female soccer players. The significance of this study is if the results show that there is a positive relationship, then there's injuries occurring because of this specialization. So what can we do, or what can I do to prevent these injuries? Is it altering practice plans? Or is it making sure these girls get in the weight room to train to prevent certain types of injuries? Is it making sure games are spread out, making sure they don't have back-to-back games on days, or reducing the intensity of practice? If we know that injuries are occurring because of specialization, then we need to educate these athletes, educate the parents, and educate coaches to understand the risk involved with this, and then let them make their choice. And so at least that they know that there are risks with choosing one sport year round. The delimitations for my study are I'm looking for adolescent female soccer players that they have to be 12 to 18 years old at a public high school in Spartanburg County with an athletic trainer. And the limitations are recall bias. These girls are going to have to remember their injuries and report those injuries. To reduce the recall bias, that's why I've involved the athletic trainers to verify the injuries that the girls report. And my sample is going to end up being, it's going to be Spartanburg County, South Carolina. And so that's just one part of South Carolina. So there's only one part of a big world. So it can really only speak for Spartanburg County. And my questionnaires with these girls, I will be assuming that they honestly answer the questions, hopefully. And then the hypothesis is there is a positive relationship between sports specialization and injuries in adolescent female soccer players. And before we keep going, I want to be sure to define specialization, or sports specialization is when an athlete participates in one sport for more than 8 months out of the year. And that's defined by Jay Anthony in his article. And he created some scales that I'll introduce later. And then injuries. There are two different types of injuries that we'll be focusing on, and that's overuse injuries, which is they occur due to repeated movements over time, and then acute injuries, which is an injury that's occurred due to a single event, so a collision or a fall, and cannot be blamed necessarily on overuse. So now we'll go to our literature review. We'll look at previous studies. The previous studies have focused on, or at least with Buckley and his colleagues, Post and Jayanthy and their colleagues, were female and males. They're looking at a very broad, and some of those are very large sample sizes, and they're surveying and giving questionnaires, but they're looking at female and male athletes. And some of them are individual sports, and most of them were team sports, but females and males are different. Our bodies are different. The way we handle injuries, the way the injury trends that are present in sports are different among males and females. And then there are a couple studies by Hall and Post, and I believe Janthe had one too, but they're focused on females, but they're looking at multiple sports. And so they're looking at basketball, volleyball, soccer, were the common ones that were found. In my study, I want to narrow that down to just female soccer. There may be trends that we cannot find in females and just soccer if we're looking at multiple sports. So I want to narrow it down. And those two studies I cited in this slide they both looked at lower limb injuries. They know that the knees tend to be a common injury for females, so they're focusing on lower body. I am choosing to expand my study to the full body. So not just lower body, but upper body, and specifically, I want to also see concussions. I know they're common in contact sports, and I want to see if there's a trend there between specialization and concussion occurrences. Now, going into one of the common themes that are in several of the articles is the 10,000 hours rule. And Jayanthy and Douglas, they explained it very well in their article, but to briefly explain it is that it takes 10,000 hours to master a skill. That theory came along, and so these athletes some of them have caught on to this, so they are coaches and parents, so they are pushing the athlete, or the athlete is choosing to spend a lot of time in their sport, trying to get those 10,000 hours at a young age to hopefully increase their chance of obtaining a college scholarship or reaching the professional level. And then Post, as mentioned earlier, that club participation. So these athletes want to do as much as they can. So they're doing school season and club season at the same time. And they're spending way too many hours in a week participating in their sport. And that's an issue. And then the Hall, in his article, sports specialization associated with an increased risk of developing anterior knee pain in adolescent female athletes, he addresses the concept of not only the physiological, but also the psychological and the social aspects of specialization. The physiological being the injuries that occur on their body. There's also the psychological. There's the burnout issue. These adolescents and our athletes are choosing to stop playing, and it's because they're burned out. They mentally can no longer continue in their sport, or they don't want to. There's no fun in it anymore, and they're just done. And then there's the social. These adolescents and these athletes are choosing their sport over their friends and their family. They're missing out on parties, or they're missing out on just general time, going to the movies, whatever they would be doing with their friends. They're missing out on that social part, which is an important part of the overall wellness for any human, especially during adolescence. And so that's another risk that's not necessarily physical that these kids are facing with specialization. And then to summarize the literature review, 2 articles, Jayanthy and Douglas, and then Blagrove, they address and focus part of their articles on injury prevention and educating on the risk. And so they have found that there is a relationship, and they want to prevent injuries. And so that's for further studies is what's the next step. If the risks are there, we need to prevent it. And then educating, another as a prevention also. And then Post, his study, cited that athletes who are injured tend to, especially ones that have to drop out of their sport because of their injury, tend to show a lower level of physical activity in adolescence, the rest of their adolescence, and into adulthood. And so as a health professional, I want to keep my athletes, or just anybody, any of these athletes, moving. And so to prevent these injuries, if at all possible, to prevent them, so that way we can ensure that they are going to be lifelong movers. So we're concerned about lifelong health and wellness in these adolescents. And back to my hypothesis, there is a positive relationship between sports specialization and injuries in adolescent female soccer players. Now to the methods section. The study design, it is descriptive research, and I'll be using quantitative data by collecting questionnaires. It's not experimental. I'm not testing a before and after group or a control group. I'm looking at information and collecting data that on injuries and that have already occurred, or they're already specializing. I'm gathering that kind of data fitting the quantitative description. Again, the participants are adolescent female soccer players, 12 to 18 years old. They had to have played at least one season at the middle school, JV, or varsity level, and must be from a public high school with an athletic trainer in Spartanburg County. So I'll be recruiting from public schools with athletic trainers in Spartanburg County. The scales I will be using, there's a 3-point and a 6-point scale. The 3-point scale by Jayanthy, both are by Jayanthy, are used in several studies, and it just ranks their specialization. The 3-point scale has low, moderate, and high specialization. The 6-point scale has no specialization or yes specialization. And also, along with our questionnaire, we'll be asking them about their club participation level and their injuries, and then the athletic trainers will verify the injuries. This study qualifies for the exempt category for the IRB process. Through the questionnaires will be anonymous through the help with the athletic trainers. So that way I will not be able to, or anyone else will be able to identify the questionnaires with a specific athlete. And there will be a power analysis completed to determine the minimum sample size for my study. The procedures will contact the high schools in Spartanburg County to determine if they have athletic trainers, and then we're sending out questionnaires through the athletic trainers, making sure that they verify the information, and then the questionnaires will be returned to me. All of that will be through, hopefully, email. And then the data will be put into Excel and then into SPSS, where I will run the Pearson's correlation test to determine if there's a relationship between sports specialization and the injury risk. And here are my references. I've got 2 slides. And that is my proposal presentation. Thank you.